Today we've got a story for you guys, and it involves both of my glorious vehicles right here. We've got the good old 92 Jeep Cherokee, which is covered in mud, as you can see. We'll get into why just a little bit later on. And of course, the glorious 1999 green 4Runner. So we're going to go ahead and start off with the Jeep and everything we've done to it, because we have done quite a bit to it since the last video. And of course, some new issues had to pop up. We're gonna go ahead and start off with the 92 Jeep Cherokee. And because Josiah, of course, has been doing the majority of the work on this thing because he actually knows what he's doing, unlike me, I'm gonna go ahead and let him explain the majority of what we've actually done to this thing since the last time you guys saw it.
All right, so since the last time we did a video on this, just after he got it, one of the first things that we went over was the fluid. So we changed oil, transfer case fluid, differentials, added some power steering fluid, and I'll get into that later as to the reason why. Both of the diff fluids were super nasty, and the rear one leaked pretty bad, so got that fixed. Another thing we did a while back is I had to weld up some stuff on the exhaust because the way that they had it on here was really bad, and I did some welding on it. To be fair, not that great, just because I had to do it on the vehicle. Super uncomfortable, but I got it on enough where it's not going to fall off, and that's kind of what we both agreed to do, just because we're like, all right, let's get him back home because he's at my house. Let's not have it fall off. Bell housing bolts, 3 out of the 4 were gone, and so I got 2 of them in. The third one that was missing is not lining up, so I'm going to have to take more of a look at that later, but we ran out of time that day. And what that was causing was whenever he went into reverse and hit the throttle, it would want to stall. It'd either stall or it would sound kind of like a supercharged big block where they kind of idle rough, you know, like up down on the RPM. That's kind of what it was doing. And then whenever you put it in 4 high or especially 4 low, you'd let off the throttle and it would stall. And that's just because the engine and the bell housing were separating. So we got those on. Another thing we had to take a look at was the brakes. So what Sam said is that the brakes were really, really bad. And what we did is we bled all the fluid. The rear passenger bleeder valve is broken off, which is kind of sums up about everything with this vehicle. All things just aren't the way they should be. So couldn't do that one, unfortunately. We're gonna do a wheel cylinder here at some point. Just didn't feel like doing it that day. Bled the rest of these with a vacula pump. So it's a little like vacuum pump. You hook up to your air compressor, hit it, and sucks out the fluid. And one thing that we noticed was the driver front, there's air bubbles nonstop, and just kept air bubbles. It wasn't getting better. And so I was like, I don't know, maybe that's the issue. Ended up just doing a manual bleed, had Sam pump up the brakes, bled out the fluid, and it came out clear. So that was good. Then we went to the passenger front caliper, and the piston was cracked. I was like, well, that's not good. So we replaced that. It was a pain, but got it working and finally stopped leaking. So got that going. And then we also adjusted the rears. And once we adjusted the rears, it stops 1,000 times better now. That was the issue. I mean, when I pulled off the drum the first time, it just slid right off. I was like, whoa, that's really easy. That's kind of too easy for how these things go with us. Ended up being that those were way out of adjustment. Now his park brake actually works, his brakes work. We're gonna get into the engine bay and go over a couple other things that we did. So the coolant, one thing I noticed was that there was like this silver metallic substance in there. And I was like, oh, hopefully that's not like metal. It ended up being stop leak. So before we went mudding, I could actually tell that this was pretty much a fairly new radiator. It was still shiny, fins weren't bent up, so I'm guessing the old radiator leaked. They put stop leak in and it didn't work. Personally, I don't like the stuff, so I wanted to flush it through. Another issue it had was this line here that goes to the overflow was backed up, and I think it might have had some stop leak in there too. I'm not totally sure, but what I noticed is we'd fill the radiator up with coolant and then drive it around a little bit, wait for it to cool. We'd open the cap and it would be low. Looked into the reservoir here and it was getting all the way up to the top because it had enough pressure to go in through this line, but not enough to suck it back out. So I just kept filling that, lowering the coolant in the radiator, but got all that fixed. There ended up being some like rubber hose thing in here that was bunched up. Sprayed that out, got that going. Another thing that we knew it was an issue before with the power steering leaking, but we didn't know where it's coming from. And when Sam got to my house when we were going mudding, we found out pretty quick. So backstory behind that is we're going to my house because I was like, hey, let me drop off my Jeep and then because the mudding place is kind of sort of by my house. Figure, let's drop off my Jeep. I'll hop in his. We'll go over there, have fun, and do all that. And he gets to my house, and I get out of my Jeep, and I turn around, and he's, you know, making a U-turn, and there's just smoke everywhere. I didn't see where it was coming out from, so I was like, oh, hope that's not his exhaust. Maybe he actually did blow it up. And there's just smoke everywhere. It's like he had his fog machine on. I go up to him like, you know, what's going on? And he's like, oh, it came out of the engine bay when I was turning around. I'm like, oh, that's not good. So shut it off. I say pop the hood. We get the hood up. And right in here, all around the intake, exhaust, all down here on like the unibody rail and all that was just covered in a fluid. And at first, I thought it kind of looked red. I'm like, hopefully that's not the transmission. I don't know why it would be, because there's one line down here, I think, for the transmission, but that was pretty dry. It's like, all right, let me get underneath, see if I can see where it's leaking from. And I noticed that it was like an orange color. I'm like, oh, well, that's the color of his power steering. It's dirty and it's kind of orange. Also didn't smell like transmission fluid. So I was like, all right, power steering, that's better than transmission, because at least you can drive home. And so I was looking, and you know, when we first popped the hood, every 5 to 10 seconds there'd be a big old puff of smoke that had come up. And that was it dripping on the exhaust, and I was like, oh, that's nice. This thing might catch on fire. Thankfully, it didn't.
It would have made for a more fun story, though.
It would have made for, oh, my neighbors already don't like me. They really would have not liked seeing this thing melt down in front of my house.
Oh, yeah.
At, what is it, like 9:30 at night?
Something like that, yeah.
So anyways, I got Sam in there and had him crank the wheel just how he did when he was turning around. And I noticed in this line that had some quick fix that didn't actually work on it. Right here, once the electrical tape and zip ties are off, there's some metal fitting, and that's where the hose goes into. Well, when he wasn't cranking it, no leak. When he cranked it, this line, you know, that's the pressure line, so it kind of moved a little bit under pressure, and then it just started leaking out a ton of fluid, which then would squirt over here and then get onto the exhaust. And so I was like, well, at least now we know where it's leaking from. Let me try to do a quick fix, because this is in the middle of the night. I'm for sure not going to replace a line. I figure might as well try something, even though it's ghetto rigged, but look at the rest of the thing. It is anyways, but hey, it still runs. Got that on, got 2 zip ties, these black ones. It still leaked pretty bad. So I was like, well, if 2 zip ties don't work, maybe 3 will. No. It leaked maybe a little bit less, but then I saw that at the top of the hose here, a new leak started to form. So this whole line is 100% wasted, so we need to do that one of these days. And with this power steering line here, we actually got video of it leaking, and you can see beforehand how it was leaking without any of my fix for it was put on there. Oh yeah, cut it. That line's gone, bro. That line is gone.
Oh, nice.
And then afterwards, you can also see that it was still leaking. I think after I did the I think in the video you can see where it's leaking out of the line too, out of the rubber. But yeah, it's an absolute unit, guys.
We zip tied the.
So this is leaking really bad. So what did we do? We did the right thing with it and electric taped it, and then I was like, well, what's even better than that? Zip ties.
So we zip tied the tape.
So we're zip tying the tape. Hopefully, you know, maybe make it seal a little better, even though it won't. And then we're gonna see if it works, and it'll still be leaking, but if it leaks a little bit less and this isn't set on fire, then I think that's a win. If it does set on fire, it's not mine, so.
Yeah, and all of this just to take it through the mud a few times.
Yeah.
Yeah, buddy.
Crank it. Stop. It is leaking like a sieve. Well, boys, my quote-unquote fix is...
Did it even help at all?
No.
Oh, great.
Another thing that just popped up very recently was it's kind of idling rough. So I don't know if the bell housing bolts came out. Samson did it at idle when he's warming up, so I don't think that's it. I'm going to take a look at the throttle body, see if the IAC's dirty. See if that bolt is good or not. Nope, bolt's in there good. So it's probably something with the IAC. Another issue it could be is the O2 sensor. So the check engine light popped on again, as they tend to do on Jeeps, and I looked at it, and it was for the O2 sensor, which was kind of funny because I told Sam he should probably replace that anyways just to be safe, because on these they're like 30, 35 bucks, and you might as well, it's old. Get underneath to take it out, and it was on hand tight. Actually, worse than that, it was just dangling there kind of. So I unscrewed it, popped it off, put on the new one, put it on, and check engine light was still there. So I'm like, huh, that's weird. And we drove it around. Sam turned it off, turned it on. Check engine light disappeared. So I was like, great. 5 or 10 minutes later, it popped back on. So that's wonderful. That might also be causing it to idle weird. I don't know. We're going to return the sensor. Maybe we got a bad unit. It's an NTK, which I'm like 99% sure is essentially what they used OEM. I know that the Bosch sensors have had issues from what I've researched, but NTK should work. We're going to get that swapped out. Hopefully that fixes it. It most likely won't. It'll probably have a check engine light on the rest of its life. So another thing that is an issue even right now. So when we fixed the 4-wheel drive and the reverse by putting in at least 2 more of the bell housing bolts, we also got the flex plate cover on there as well. So that's good. That's all sealed up there. But another thing we noticed is like it'll pop into 4-wheel drive just fine and 4 low just fine, but has a real tough time popping out of 4 high into 2-wheel. What you have to do is you have to put it in reverse, back it up, and then it disengages like that. So what we're very sure, 99% sure is the issue, because I've already adjusted the linkage for the transfer case multiple times, because I thought maybe that was why it was acting weird, but no, that wasn't it. Got that adjusted just fine, but if you look at this tire, it is a 215/75R15. Well, I think that's way too small for these, but I think some of them might have came with that. I think that's what's on the door tag. But you look at the rest of these tires, and where is it? Here we go. Right there, it's 225/75R15. So 3 out of the 4 are the 225s. One of them is a 215, so I know that can cause some binding issues. And so at some point, whenever Sam gets new tires, I'm hoping and I'm pretty sure that'll fix the issue. And after that, this thing should be somewhat sorted if I can get the idle issue fixed. On the topic of brakes, this tire, when we were trying to take it off, one of the lug nuts was like almost seized on there. It would not want to come off. We had Sam's dad's really strong air impact on it.
At 150 PSI, mind you.
At 150 PSI, she was cooking, and it would not budge. And so I was like, well, maybe my Milwaukee somehow might be able to do it, although I know it has less power. Got that on there, nothing. And then Sam got to the air impact again, and finally it came off. Then the tire didn't want to come off. And one of the holes here had a bunch of mud and stuff caked up in it. I don't think that was one that was hard to take off, but we didn't go mudding. That was there, I guess, when he got it. Then getting the tire off was kind of tough, and when we got it off, some water came out. So inside these alloys, about right here between all the lugs, there's like holes in there. And so water got trapped in there and caused some corrosion, and it was really gross and had this like white film over everything. It kind of looks like when your battery grounds have all that white like dust stuff on it. It's kind of what it looked like, but it was right in here. And then I think when we re-bled the brakes, it had some water in there again. It's just the corrosion wasn't as nasty because it was only sitting a few days. But yeah, that's fun. The rest of the tires were fine. I think one of the ones in the rear was kind of tough to get off, but that was just because of rust. So it's all fun. So the next thing in the line of issues on this absolute unit ripper was the wipers didn't work when he first got it. So you'd hit the switch, nothing happened. And what I noticed is in the fuse box on the inside, the circuit breaker for the wipers wasn't there. So we went to the junkyard. So it's actually a part that you can't get anymore. So we had to go to the junkyard, get the circuit breaker, plugged that in, and then the cruise control unit over there started clicking whenever it should be the wipers. So I was like, huh, that's great. Then I was like, well, let's take off the steering wheel and look at the wiring in the steering column. Well, the wheel did not want to come off, and we put grade 8 bolts in there, so good heavy duty bolts. One of them broke off. And I had the puller on it, it was bending them, and eventually one of them broke off, so that steering wheel's probably never coming off without a lot of pain and suffering. So what I figured was that next I'll look at the wiring underneath the dash, just see if there's anything there. Well, I noticed that there's a wiring harness unplugged. I was like, huh, let me do some research and see what that's to. Ends up being for the wiper control. Plug that in, this works fine, wipe just fine. Now with the washer, there's a funny little thing. So you got the switch here, push it, hey, they work great, but no fluid coming out. It's not empty, we filled it up the other day. What you gotta do, this is for the rear wiper, is you hit the wash, wow, it works great. Now, aha, you got clean windows. So I don't know what's the issue with that. If it works, and this is a cheap beater, so if it works, it works. It's kind of the theme with this thing. And lastly, on this wonderful thing, there are no switches here. There should be on every one of these holes. So that's down, tucked into the door. We've taped it multiple times. Something here's broken. We just need to get one out of junkyard or glue it in there. But when it was in there the other day, Sam rolled down the window and we're working on it in the garage here, and then it wouldn't go up. So we got everything else working, brakes and all that working. I'm like, well, we can't go mudding, or didn't want to go mudding with the window down all the way. And I was like, well, let me take off the switches. There's some corrosion in there. Clean that out. Nothing. These two doors work. These two won't. This door has a lot of problems in it that we'll discuss in another video. But I remembered that in these Jeeps, they're Chrysler, all right? These, I think 90 or 91s to 01s are all Chrysler made. And Chrysler electronics have never really known to be great, so you got Chrysler wiring that's pretty awful. And I'm guessing that the wire in the door here is worn out and about to snap, and so what I had to do is I held the door open all the way, rolled up just fine. If you close it, wouldn't roll up. Open it all the way, I guess that wire just has enough of a connection for it to roll up, and then it's fine, so this window's not going down until we fix that. Other than that, there's probably 1,000 other issues with this thing, but she runs and didn't break when we took it mudding this time, so at least it's got that.
We're gonna go ahead and get into how this thing did in the mud. And actually, to my surprise, actually not really, the alternator lived. That was like one of the huge issues we had taking the 4Runner in the mud. Every single time we would go in there, it would put that stupid little battery icon up on the dash and just drive me insane. Because why would that kill an alternator? Now, to the normal person, you're like, well, you're filling it up with water and mud. Of course it's gonna break. Meanwhile, on Josiah's 1996 Cherokee has been ripped through the mud harder than the 4Runner ever has, and has never lost an alternator to the mud. And the same thing just happened to this. As you can see, we've got the engine bay nice and full of mud right here, like even on the engine block a little bit, all over the compressor, all over the radiator hose, and the battery, which, mind you, isn't even held in properly. So that's, that's definitely what you want with your battery. However, the alternator lived. Nothing happened to it. Everything was fine. It did chuck a lot more steam than the 4Runner did, but what are you gonna do? I guess just more of the exhaust line is exposed because there's no skid plates or something. But regardless, guys, this is a 1992 vehicle, okay? I've got videos of it ripping through the mud that you see right now. I hit the big puddle going 25, it didn't spray water up as high because the tires on this thing kind of suck and they're not stanced out as far as they are on the 4Runner. But regardless, it did fine. Nothing happened to it, as I've said like 10 times at this point. But that's just the way it is because it's a Jeep and not one of them Toyotas.
Look at that glorious 4.0 right there.
Yeah.
Those are king.
Definitely.
3.4 V6 ain't got nothing on the 4.0, buddy.
I would have to agree at this point, especially because the last time we took Josiah's Jeep in the mud, it took on water. Yeah, you heard right. Water got sucked into the engine. And what happened? The check engine light shut off. boys, we just took the 96 in the mud. Oh yeah, it's not supposed to look like that, just in case you're wondering. Look at this.
And got all that nice water and mud up in there. Yeah, and see, if that was the 4Runner, it would have died.
Oh, definitely. You would have heard a nice clunk and then no more start.
There's a little water in there. That's mostly got sucked out because I was driving, but yeah, she was not happy. Bogged a little bit. We kind of bogged a lot, but it's fine. Runs good now.
Oh yeah.
And it fixed my check engine light somehow.
Yeah. We ripped through that deep puddle and then check engine light just went away. Because to fix a Jeep, you just gotta beat them up, and then they're like, "Oh, okay, I got you." And then,
yeah. Now if I can figure out how to get this on, that'd be kind of cool.
See, that's easier on the 4Runner, so the 4Runner's superior.
Yeah, that's what it is.
So the problems and stories do not end with the Cherokee, guys. We gotta talk about that 4Runner. So we're gonna go ahead and start off with the number one issue in this thing. If you look right here next to the inferior to the 4-liter inline 6 V6 we got in this thing right here is what's known as the alternator. Now, with this thing, as I mentioned when I was talking about how the Jeep just did flawlessly in the mud, this thing doesn't like the mud too much, it would seem. So what would happen is I would take it in the mud and it would be fine, and I would go through it like 2 or 3 more times, and then the battery light would come on. So when this happened the first time, it was the original alternator in the vehicle, like since it was built, as far as I know, because I didn't see any alternator service done in any of the service records back to 2002. So we were like, okay, probably just a coincidence because it's so old, because alternators do die out after a while. So we put in a new one, and it was all good. Went to the mud the next time, same thing. And I keep in mind I'm putting in Denso alternators in this thing, and that is what Toyota used as an OEM part. So we're like, okay, cool. Put in another alternator. Same thing. All right, cool. 4th alternator. Same thing. All right, let's try a different brand. So Josiah's been using CarQuest alternators in his Jeeps, at least in the 96, and it has had no issues in the mud, as I have explained before. So we put a CarQuest in there, went through the mud, fine. Went through the mud again, fine. And went through the mud a 3rd time, and it was all good. Now, after going through the mud, I usually do clean out the engine bay with a pressure washer, which is an okay thing to do if you do it properly. However, I was like, oh, let's go ahead and force water directly into the alternator because that'll help clear the mud out of it. No, all that does is kill it. So we're done at the car wash, drive back to Josiah's house, it's all good. And then when I go to start the car to leave, you know, the battery light and all the other lights on the dash come on, and then the battery light doesn't shut off. So I'm like, great. So that was alternator number 5 in 6 months. This is now the 6th alternator we've had to put in this thing within the last 6 months. We switched back to a Denso alternator because I am done taking this thing through the mud because it just simply cannot handle it, which is really disappointing because when I bought the Toyota, everyone was like, oh, it's bulletproof, you can do anything to it, it'll live, they're great in the mud. No. And the alternator's only half the problem. The other half, which you unfortunately can't really see too well, is the starter. I don't think you'll be able to see it. Nah, you won't be able to see it. I can kind of see it right there. Kinda. You won't be able to see it on the camera. Now the starter. I had the starter go out on me. Actually, the story is pretty funny. It also kind of sucks. I had gone through a Wendy's drive-thru after a video shoot I had. You know, I was hungry. I wanted some chicken nuggets. So I got some chicken nuggets. You know, turned the car off, just sat in there, ate. I didn't, you know, because of the Rona, couldn't eat inside the restaurant, so I just pulled off in the parking lot and ate the chicken nuggets, as you do. I went to start the car, and it just clicks. Now, I did actually make a video of this. It's also on an Instagram story, I'm pretty sure, if you want to check that out. Starter's just sitting there clicking, and I'm like, okay, maybe I killed the battery because I was listening to music while I was eating the chicken nuggets. So one of my friends was pretty close by, so I was like, hey, can you come jump my car? We put the jumper cables on it. Same thing, nothing happened. So I'm like, all right, it's the starter. Great. I call my dad out, and as I don't know if you guys know this, but my dad's a mechanic. He's been a mechanic, I think, for 10 or so years, longer than I've been alive. So he comes down, brings a hammer, and we're just sitting there hammering on the stupid starter. And you could actually see in the Instagram story that I posted of it, while we were trying to start it, it actually started to melt the wire for my subwoofer, the the 0 or whatever, I think it's a 4-gauge power wire for the sub. So that was great, and it didn't work. Couldn't get it started. So after that, I called Josiah, and I'm like, bro, the starter's dead in the 4Runner. And he's like, haha, should have got a Jeep, haha. And now I'm starting to realize, should have got a Jeep. Anyway, Josiah comes up, he brings some tow straps, and we put the tow strap on. There's a little hook underneath the front bumper that I think they used on the assembly line to pull it through, is what I was told. We just use it as a recovery hook. So put the tow strap on there, put the other end on the back of a actually 99 Toyota Tacoma, and towed it back to my house, which then in turn killed the brakes because it was a slack line and you had to ride the brakes to keep the line taut. And the brakes were already on their way out anyway, so I didn't really care. So we put the new starter in, I think a day or two later, and it was 24 degrees and windy and snowing, and we had to do it in the street because we couldn't start it to get it in the garage. So that was great. That was a great experience right there. And then it was all well and good. I noticed with the new starter that it was actually starting a lot nicer than it would with the old one. So the old one definitely was already on its way out, as would be expected because it was the original starter to this thing. We get the new starter in, all's well and good, until we go mudding another night. I think this was on the night we killed the 3rd or 4th alternator. So we're driving back, I back it into the driveway and leave it, and then we take my dad's car down to Josiah's house and take a real vehicle, his 96, through the mud. So after that, after we get back from that, my mom tells me I need to move my 4Runner out of the driveway because her car is usually parked in the garage right behind it, and she needed to take my sister to school the next day or something like that. So I'm like, all right, let's go ahead and start it and see if the alternator is working again by some miracle. Wouldn't even start. It just wouldn't even start. You could hear the starter just kind of whirring in there. Later on, I found out that the whirring noise was because the gear in the starter that engages the motor actually moves out ever so slightly to engage the motor. And it was stuck, so it was just spinning in place and not engaging anything. And again, I thought it was because the battery was dead because I had driven it home. I think this was the 3rd time on just the battery on a 20-minute drive. And that was also the same night that I ruined the fender on this thing by backing my dad's car out of the driveway. And the door on the 4Runner opened the rest of the way, caught up on my dad's car and just ruined everything and just was great. So that was there. And that was done. So we put in a new starter, put in new hinges on the door. All well and good, except I can't open the freaking door all the way without ruining the fender even more. So that's great. That's a great thing having to deal with right there. Now, a couple months later, near the end of April, after I got back from a video shoot in Florida, my dad and my sister and I were trying to go to Shake Shack. And for those who don't know, in Colorado, they like to change their hours every other week. So their website and everything said, oh, we're open till 9. And we got there and there's 2 signs on the door. One of them says, hours 7 days a week, 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. And then there was a sign under it that said 11 a.m. to 8 p.m. or something like that. Regardless, we got there and they were closed. So we're like, that sucks. All right. So we're on the way back home from Shake Shack, and some just the loveliest person to ever exist on this world just cuts in front of me in his white piece of crap Volkswagen Jetta. So I, of course, slam on the brakes to avoid rear-ending the guy because I did not want to deal with that. I was already in a pretty bad mood because I couldn't get my burger. So did that, slammed the brakes, and then the next time I went to use the brakes, the pedal went all the way to the floor and didn't do anything. So I'm just like, oh, buddy, that's not good. You can't be driving without brakes. Now, to be clear, you had to press real hard on it, but they would still stop the car by some miracle. So we get home, I park it in the street, my dad and I are looking at it. There's no leaks anywhere. So we're like, all right, it's probably the master cylinder, which is this thing right over here. And we'll get into that in just a second. So a day or two later, we get a new master cylinder in. It wasn't an OEM part because they're way too expensive, so I just bought some cheap one from Advance Auto. We put that in, same issue. And Josiah had noticed, because he was here too, that he's just usually here when something breaks. Sometimes he's even the cause of it, just that bad luck charm kind of guy.
Only for the Toyotas.
Josiah's sitting in there, and he can pump the brakes up, but if he held it, it would go all the way to the floor. And then we noticed there was a puddle under the rear driver wheel. So we were like, okay, now it leaks. We were thinking that it was that we had broke the line somehow while bleeding the brakes. So we go and since this thing has drum brakes on the rear, we try to pull the drum off, and it did not want to come off. It was stuck. So we're hitting on it with a mallet. We tried putting bolts through the holes on the drum to kind of pull the drum off. Nothing was working. We actually snapped both the bolts we bought doing that. Similarly to how we did it with the Cherokee and the steering wheel, except that the ones we used weren't grade 8 because of some issue where no one around here carries grade 8 bolts in that size. So anyway, we're like, okay, we're done. So we have the 4Runner on jack stands. We take both the freaking tires off, and to add to the look of this house, let me paint you guys the picture. We've got this 4Runner, both of its back tires off on jack stands, and then in front of it is a Jeep dripping oil and power steering fluid, and at the same time, we're getting the roof redone. So there's a big dumpster in the driveway, trash blowing everywhere from the shingle packs they had. It looked like I lived in the ghetto for a few days, which I thought was pretty funny. So anyway, my dad finally ended up getting the drum off of the rear wheel, and this is what it looked like. It doesn't look too good, does it? So it's just full of mud. It's all nice and corroded in there. So we put on new rear brake components, like everything. New shoes, new wheel cylinders, new spring pack, and new drums. And the drums were shiny, which was great. You know, they rusted a day later, but that's just how they work. Anyway, after all of that, the dead pedal was still there. So we're sitting there like, okay, what in the crap is causing this? So my dad had the idea to put the original master cylinder back in here, and then he bled all of them again, and it was fine. The cause of it was originally that rear wheel cylinder. It just wasn't leaking for some reason. And then we put in a new master cylinder that was dead out of the box. So thanks, CarQuest. That's par for the course for them anyway. Now the problems don't end there, unfortunately. A couple weeks ago, maybe it was about a month ago at this point, I was getting gas, and it was a pretty hot day, so I rolled in, had the AC on, and it was all well and good. So I turned the car off, put gas in it, and then turned it back on, and I noticed this really loud squeak coming from the engine bay. So I'm like, what is that? And then a few minutes later, or a few seconds later, I start smelling burning rubber. And I also noticed that the AC is now blowing hot. So I'm like, I think I know what this is. I hit the AC button, squeak goes away. So I'm like, awesome, the AC is dead right before the hot season starts. So that's great. I unfortunately don't have any videos of it. It's pretty inconsistent on how it does it. So it's a little bit hard to see at the angle I've got here, but underneath this pulley right here is the AC compressor. And every once in a while, what it'll do is just start turning kinda inconsistently, if that makes sense. It'll be spinning fine, and then it'll bind up and kind of skip, and then start spinning just fine again. Something's up with the AC compressor, and they are honestly not as expensive as I was thinking, but still it's another $400 that I don't want to spend on this thing. I would rather spend it on building up the Cherokee and having fun with it, but no, I keep having to pay for things that break in the 4Runner. Another thing with this 4Runner, I think I did actually mention this in the original video with the Jeep Cherokee, is that the power steering system on this is going out. So I have a feeling that I broke the rack open on one of the trails we did last year. Because that was around when the rack started leaking. Shortly after the rack started leaking, the power steering pump started whining, and it's kind of funny because in the right temperature on the right day, it kind of sounds like a small, crappy supercharger. It's amusing until you realize how expensive it is to fix the problem. Similarly to the AC being inconsistently broken, the power steering rack leaks inconsistently. It'll go weeks without leaking any fluid, and then I'll just pull it into the driveway and it'll just drop fluid all over the driveway. I've got no explanation why, but there's that Toyota reliability yet again. Really quick before we get into the final issue on this 4Runner, I'm sitting here editing the video at 3 o'clock in the morning as per usual, and I realized that I forgot to mention another problem. Take a listen to this. So that grinding noise is my front driver wheel bearing. Just another issue to add on to the huge pile of others. Now, the last issue I can remember with this thing is the fact that it stalls. No idea why. I've got no explanation why it does it, but I have noticed a pattern. It stalls at idle when it's 75 degrees or hotter outside. Used to be that it was 85 degrees or hotter outside, but I guess as the years go by, it just deteriorates more and more. So here's the deal. Most of the time it happens is, as I said, when it's idling, as in like when you're waiting in line at a drive-thru or something like that. Now, Josiah and I were working on the Jeep one day and we decided to go get some drink that like ended up being really crappy and tasted like medicine. So we're sitting in line at that drive-thru and the 4Runner just starts idling really weird. Like it almost felt like it was misfiring. And we're like, I think it's gonna stall, because we had seen it stall multiple times before. And eventually, yeah, sure enough, it dropped below 500 and then just went all the way to 0. All the lights on the dash came on and it was great. I had to restart it. And in that drive-thru, I think it was like a 5-minute wait and it happened like 6 or 7 times. So that was great. And the entire time it's been doing this, it hasn't thrown a check engine code for it, which is really weird because, as I said, it feels like it's misfiring pretty bad before it actually ends up stalling. But that's just what it does. And I've got no idea why. I can't find answers anywhere online for it. I've talked to mechanics. They say they've never seen anything like it before. So that's just another issue on top of this Toyota with its incredible reliability. I will say this though, like with no sarcasm, I am very impressed with this battery right here. And look at that, it's a Toyota battery. So as I said, I've killed the alternator in this thing more than I should have, you know. We're on number 6. All of the times it died have been down by Josiah's house, and that's roughly 20 minutes away from here. So this battery has gotten me home on a 20-minute drive 5 times now, and it still cranks the engine over just fine. I do tend to listen to music with the engine off. I mean, obviously not loudly, because if you do that with the subwoofers, you will kill the battery in about 30 seconds, but regardless, if there's one good thing about this 4Runner, it's the Toyota True Start battery that has somehow not failed me yet. So there you go, guys. That is going to be it for this short update on both of my just glorious, high-end, superior, just super reliable vehicles. As usual, big shout out to Josiah for actually filming this video for me. I'm sure his arms are getting pretty tired holding that gimbal, so I'm going to drag this outro out as long as I possibly can. Anyway, guys, as usual, if you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. Go subscribe to Josiah. He doesn't post anything, but just do it anyway. And yeah, till the next video, guys, that is going to be it. Thank you for watching.